call, please.
Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
If you would please stand for a moment of silent prayer or reflection, followed by the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Board members, the minutes for December 2nd are in your packet. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none, I'll take a motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Next in your packet is expenditures and financial reports. There is also a supplement claims report on the table. Anything in this outside of the memo that you'd like to call out, Monica? I don't think so. Okay. Board members have any questions? Hearing none, when you're ready, I'll take a motion and second for approval.
Make a motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
On your table, I have included the most recent COVID-19 update from the health unit. You will notice that cases are increasing. This is available for your review. Do you have any questions or comments on this report? Moving on, we have departmental reports included in the packet, including Marshfield Fire and online users. Are there any questions from the board on these? All right, that will move us into unfinished business. And the first item on tonight's agenda is a presentation from Rick McConnell on economic development incentive policies. Rick?
Good evening, Mayor and Board. A pleasure to be with you tonight. I always appreciate the chance to come and visit with local government bodies. That's kind of what I cut my teeth on, and so it's always fun to do that. Although I know when you say PowerPoint and economic development, sometimes everybody goes, "Oh, I've heard this so many times." Hopefully, we can cover a little bit of new ground tonight. I wanted to just first introduce myself and the law firm that I'm with. I'm with a firm called Armstrong Teasdale. We're a big full service law firm. Our headquarters are in St. Louis. We've got about 350 or so lawyers throughout the US and in London, actually. But I think the important takeaways for Marshfield and other Missouri communities are we're headquartered in Missouri. We have 3 Missouri offices. We've been here for a long, long time, and we're going to be here. We have this is part of a proposal process to help you with the policy. So in our proposal, we listed several attorneys who could help with that. I just wanted to highlight the experience of just a couple of them. And I always get to talk about myself since I'm the one talking. So I've been doing this kind of legal work for about 20 years, public finance and incentive work. Prior to going to law school, I worked for the city of Branson as assistant city administrator. So I've kind of felt it from both sides, so to speak. Another person I wanted to mention is Rob Clark. Rob is actually the head of the department that I work in, which so he's roughly over 25% of the law firm in terms of the number of lawyers, but it's a finance and real estate practice. But the great thing about Rob is he does this kind of work. So we've got the head guy on our list. So that's always a good thing, I think. And then the other folks are obviously very experienced in their areas, special districts, real estate development, et cetera. So we can cover all the bases for you. So then just to jump into kind of a discussion of policies themselves and why would you have one? I think that one of the big things for communities is if you've gone through the thought process of having a policy of this type, and you can put it in front of a potential developer, business owner um, of any type, it shows them that you are open for business, at least to the extent that you want to present that. And it may be, and I say that, you may decide that you're not. You may decide you don't want that kind of development, that we're not going to incentivize it. But I think where most communities land is we will incentivize development, but only certain types and only in certain ways. And I think that's a more reasonable way to do it. And it's reflective of the values that your citizens have and what they want you to do and what they want you to bring to the community. And I don't, the first TIF I worked on after law school was for a little town called Mound City, which is in Northwest Missouri. And they got a Dollar General, and then we amended it, and they got a McDonald's, and then they amended it, and we got a Subway. And they were very pleased with that, because they had to drive to St. Joe to buy paper towels. So it's all relative, what do your citizens want? What do you want in your community? I think another reason to have this discussion and thought process earlier rather than later is that you, again, as representatives of the community or bringing in other representatives from the community, is you can talk about hard questions before you have a time crunch, because these projects don't wait. Developers sort of go on their own time, and you have to sort of take it with a grain of salt, but there is a time element to it. And so if you have something you're interested in and you're trying to decide whether as a community you want it or not, or to what level you want it, it makes it harder. And these projects have momentum. They start to snowball, and then everybody gets excited. And then it's like, well, why aren't we approving that? And then other people in the community may not feel that way. So it helps you sort of move through that and be ready for it. Again, I think it's a values-based thing. And I, not to be sort of corny about it, but it's really, what do we want our community to be? And what are we willing to do to make that happen? Are we okay with incentives? Are we okay redirecting tax revenues to private developers? Well, maybe we are for public improvement costs, or maybe we are for just anything we can pay for. Communities run the gamut, and all of it's okay. There's no wrong answer here. I mean, there's certainly what's legal and what's not, but in terms of what you want to do, it's your decision. And the other thing is, give your staff a kind of a head start in those day-to-day discussions that they have as they field those telephone calls, and they can at least say, well, the policy says this. We'll still have to talk to the board, but that's a good clue. So anyway, I think that's why you would consider having one. So and again, not to delve into any of these too much, but on the incentive side, well, I just wanted to kind of 10,000 foot on some of the very sort of typical incentives that are out there and used. And it's the alphabet soup, the toolbox, whatever you want to call it, but acronym city, whatever. But these are all ways to abate and or redirect and or create revenues for development. So TIF is the one that most folks have heard of, and some people frankly find it very objectionable. And the reason is that you, as a city, have the capability to redirect 100% of the new property tax from a project to project costs. Of course, the biggest player in the property tax game is the school district. And so, as you might expect, they get a little bit concerned about that. You can also redirect 50% of new sales taxes. We call them economic activity taxes, or EATs. Again, the county is going to be concerned about that, and whatever other taxing districts you have will be concerned about that. Now, the other thing about TIF is you can do a TIF and not do 100%. You can do 50%. I mean, you can do lots of things. You have a lot of capability to tailor to a project here. So TIFs can be used in blighted areas or conservation areas, and that's where some of the controversy occurs. Blight isn't necessarily, urban decay. It can mean lots of other things, inadequate infrastructure, that type of thing. Obsolete platting is another one that is very commonly used to find blight. Conservation area just means you've got a bunch of old buildings in one area. And there's very few conservation area TIFs. Most people will go with the blight designation. What can you fund with these revenues that you redirect? You can do site costs, public and private improvements, and lots of other stuff. And most of the infrastructure type improvements can be outside of the district that you designate for the TIF. And it's all up to the city as to how that works. You draw the boundaries and you set the levels. You'll enter into a development agreement with the developer to talk about how these revenues are used and how the project comes to pass. Chapter 100, which just simply refers to where this is located in the Missouri statutes, Chapter 100 RSMO. So this is actually a statute that used to be used for industrial revenue bonds, if you're familiar with that term, until the tax code changed and it made them really hard to do. It is the primary method of doing tax abatement in Missouri in non-blighted areas. You do not have to have a blight finding. So with Chapter 100, you can abate real property taxes, personal property taxes, and you can create an exemption from sales tax for construction materials. Some pretty big stuff there for an industrial user. And we've seen projects where just the personal property tax is enough to get the user in, and that's where their cost is, tens of millions of dollars. So we issue bonds. The bonds really don't have what I would call sort of, they're not really used to raise revenue. It's really a structure that we use to create tax abatement. So it will appear on your financial statements, usually in the notes, and it'll be called a conduit issue. And I think most folks who evaluate your financials will know what that means, but we can provide some examples if this was something that you were interested in. Primarily for industrial type uses, office, warehouse, and other commercial type projects. It is used in the apartment context fairly often, and that's a little bit of a newer trend, although that sounds like it's residential. The act of renting, et cetera, turns it into a commercial enterprise. Chapter 353, at least that's the theory, and nobody's challenged it yet, so I'll just go with it. We've done it several times, both sides of the state. Chapter 353, again, just a reference to Missouri statute. This is a tool that's been around since I think the 1950s or so. So it's the oldest one of all these that we'll talk about. And it is for blighted areas. And it's only for real property tax abatement. And so it's limited in what it can do. But if your project fits into that, it's pretty effective and pretty easy to implement. It involves, you create a separate corporation, you have a development agreement, so you have all the protections that you would normally have. But it's the approval process is simpler, the documentation process is simpler than TIF, for example.
So Rick, you're talking a lot about blighted properties and blighted findings, and whether you do or don't have to. And
Right.
so how does that affect undeveloped property? I mean, how does that come into play? And what are you defining, or what is the definition of blighted properties when you talk about that?
So with, sometimes they're called green fields. Again, it's all a sort of it depends type situation. If you have platting, obsolete platting, if you have inadequate infrastructure, if somebody can go out and take pictures of the property and there's trash all over it, those are sort of the factors that would allow you to find that blight is there. Most commonly in these situations, there'll be a planning firm that goes out and takes a look at the property in question, and they have done this a million times, and they will produce a report that makes a recommendation to you. And in terms of sort of the legal framework of that, there's a lot of deference to the finding of the legislative body. And if you've got a legitimate consultant who gives you a reasonable report, it's pretty hard to overturn that. Part of the reason I keep mentioning it is that, you know, there's some political brouhaha around that term.
Sure.
I mean,
That's
and
why I asked.
yeah,
Sure.
and you know, there probably should be, because has it been abused? Of course it has. I mean, that, you know, bad facts make bad laws, what we say.
Sure.
Well, bad projects make, you know, sort of bad attitudes, I guess.
Right.
But I think that you have to be sort of, you have to be careful in how you consider it. You have to have, you know, the information in front of you. But this has been done enough throughout the state that folks who come in will be familiar with it. They'll know, for example, the developer will know they need to pay for that planning firm. The city's not going to do it.
Yeah.
And they have to land the right way. And this is not a rubber stamp deal. I mean,
Sure.
it has to be legitimate. So if it's, you know, if it, you know, there are some greenfields that simply wouldn't qualify. A lot of them do, though, because they might be frankly agricultural land that has never been platted, came in from the county, that is underserved in the roads, water, sewer context. And those are factors that you can work with. So, yeah, again, not that traditional, you know, crumbling building concept. So,
So
So
when
in
you
your
said,
last example, those could be considered blighted.
yeah.
so
As a
In
general
our-
rule, blighted really means that it's no longer producing a revenue stream, or the property is not working the way it was intended. Or the way that we are now intending it to operate.
Repurposing.
Either one of those. So it's a, blight is actually a repurposing. But it has a very negative connotation to it in today's society.
Yeah, there's a concept in some of the cases, economic underutilization is the term that I've seen. And it is really that. Is it really sort of producing at its highest and best level, to use of a planning term, I guess. And, you know, fortunately for the approval of these projects, again, there's a lot of deference given to you all to make that determination. But again, we have what we want to make sure of is we give you the information, we give you sufficient the reports and all the documentation. That's what you make your decision based on. And you can go either way with it. I mean, it's up to you as long as it's just reasonable. So anyway, so that's why you know, if you do one of these projects, you'll get, you know, volumes of paper, unfortunately. Okay, so probably enough on 353. So our special districts, community improvement districts and transportation development districts are probably the most alike. So let's talk about those that are together. They are separate entities from the city. The city and the county can do it too, can form a CID if it's requested to do so by property owners. The TDD is formed by a circuit court. And again, typically based on a property owner petition. So the property owners are asking for this district to be formed and to levy some type of tax or special assessment to raise revenue. The neighborhood improvement district, well, okay, so to finish that discussion, so they're separate entities. They can raise their own revenues, they can issue their own bonds, they have their own board of directors, which you can sort of have some representation on as the city or not, depending on, again, sort of your policy view of that. I mean, do we want to be involved, or do we just, you know, want to keep it way off the books? And cities run the gamut on that. I mean, you see every approach under the sun. Again, I don't think there's a right or wrong. There are advantages and disadvantages both ways. The neighborhood improvement district is also formed by the city, again, based on a property owner petition, but it is not a separate entity. It is just a line on a map. And within that area, you can levy special assessments, and they're most typically used where the city is going to issue general obligation bonds. which are really limited general obligation bonds in that they're first payable from the special assessments, but if the special assessments don't come in, you're on the hook to make the payments. And that's why you must be incredibly diligent in looking at those. And there are multiple examples here in we're in Greene County still. Yeah.
Well, sure, but
Yeah,
Yes.
Rick and I are involved in some other cities that
you're right.
have issues.
Yeah, and we'll talk about one that might actually come out okay in Parksville, where I live up in Kansas City, but there have been some bad, if they're formed in 2007, in 2008, they probably didn't do very well. So it takes a long time. It takes a long time to make those good. And in any event, something to very carefully consider. Great tool for the right project. Maybe a small scale thing that, if things really go haywire, well, it's not going to bankrupt this type thing. But just something to look at carefully. So what do we use and when in the incentive world? It just depends. For retail development, typically we see the TIF, CID, and TDD because the most common revenue generating tools with the CID and TDD are the sales taxes that they can levy themselves. Now they can also do property taxes and special assessments, but most commonly they do a sales tax. The TIF, of course, can capture economic activity taxes that are incremental. And so big tool in terms of creating revenue for financing purposes. For office development, Chapter 100, it doesn't create any economic activity taxes. The incentive is abating real property tax. Industrial development, kind of the same thing, but personal property tax definitely comes into play. If we have some of that really traditional redevelopment, TIF, of course, with the blighted area, 353 with the blighted area. And one I didn't put on here, but it can come into play is the CID. It can do some very limited things in blighted areas in terms of rehabbing existing buildings. So if you have sort of a line of strip centers somewhere, and everybody does, they could band together and put a special assessment on and, kind of work on their facades, So there are different ways to use these tools. It doesn't always have to be for a Walmart supercenter, okay? And the neighborhood infrastructure, again, that's the NID, sort of small scale curb and gutter, street lights, that type of thing.
So
Rick, I'm gonna say, Rick, they're familiar with this on the way here. I mean, like Stratford's Rail Park, they're familiar, I'm assuming, with that. So you might just kind of, in context of something close by, what kind of tools were used with
Sure.
that rail park?
I will. I don't think I have Stratford on my list, but I will talk about Stratford. I didn't know if that was PC since we were neighbors, but.
So a question I would have, kind of going back, so something that's on the forefront here is that we're very limited on housing. And so
Yeah.
there are several properties that are on the cusp of just wanting to break loose and put some of the stuff in. One thing hindering that, and even us on some things, is the sewer.
Right.
So can you put it into real terms and real text for something that is live and in front of us? We've got some developers that are wanting to put a subdivision in, but one of their big hangups or hiccups is they just putting in a lift station or improving a lift station. So if they come to the table right now, which is a real scenario, right? And they're wanting to put this addition in and they're looking at $500,000 for this lift station and improvement for the sewer. Now they've got all their other expenses that they're looking at, not asking for participation.
Right.
What would the city utilize, or how would that work? How could we participate? And keep in mind, we've got one here, we've got one on this side of town, we got one on this side of town. How do you be consistent? But what tool would we be using to do something?
Sure. And, that's one where, if the cost is low enough and the value of the land is high enough, I mean, that's the type of situation where you could use a NID. You're talking about 500,000 and not 5 million.
Yeah.
And it's a really fairly simple construct in terms of, are we putting so much in assessments on this property that one blip in the housing market and the developer will just walk away from it and let the county sell it? And that's exactly what happened in Greene County. And it's, it was in the paper. 500,000 may be too much, but maybe it's a cost share deal. Maybe you do 250 and 250. So a NID could work. There are agreements that can be put in place where, and I don't know if this would be the situation here, but if the developer's out front on an improvement that a lot of other people can benefit from, can enter into an agreement where he fronts cost, he or she fronts cost, and then as somebody else hooks on, they get paid back. So it sort of just depends. You can also sort of build some stuff into your sewer rates to recoup capital costs if you want to go out and borrow for it. So it's actually what. So this is the other list. And I think that what we were talking about, you could do the NID. Some neighborhoods use a community improvement district concept, again, probably for special assessments. If they draw it big enough, they can take some commercial property in and get some sales tax, maybe to fund that type of improvement. They can borrow themselves if somebody will loan it to them. But if the city is going to really sort of meaningfully participate, these are the other things that would allow you to do that. And I'm sure some of them you have. And impact fees, we've all heard of them. Missouri is not the greatest state for impact fees. So you have to be a little creative and make sure you know what the Hancock Amendment says. Otherwise, taxes. Okay, brilliant, thanks. There are a lot of specific taxes out there that, whether it's capital improvements, transportation, parks and stormwater, the general sales tax, which you can bump up to $0.015. There are options there. Of course, that all takes voter approval. User fees, you can design your user fees to recoup capital costs as an element of the user fee, but it just has to be based on actual usage to pass Hancock analysis. Special assessments, again, one of the oldest tools in the book, kind of nasty. I think Springfield actually uses them quite a bit for basic neighborhood improvements. And then we get into, the borrowing stuff. And, the first two take voter approval. Revenue bonds are payable from the revenues of your systems. And you pledge to raise your rates if you don't have the revenues to pay them. GO bonds, you're pledging to levy a property tax to repay them. Now you can use other things like sales tax to do it, but if it falls short, you're on the hook. You got to pay it. Lease purchase for the type of improvement you're talking about is a viable alternative, and I've seen that used quite a bit. Cities, water districts, sewer districts, for sort of that thing that there is some equipment value there. And so we have some collateral that we can talk about, even though everybody knows that it's not really worth as much as we're borrowing. But and you can just sort of program into your rate base, the repayment of that lease purchase. Doesn't take voter approval, but the interest rates are higher because you don't have that sort of guaranteed repayments rate. The last two things are sort of their own animal. TIF bonds, the city can do that. Again, be very careful. Certainly be very careful if you are asked to back them with your general fund. Again, there are disaster stories on that. But then these special districts, they can do their own bonds, and they do them a lot, especially PDPs for some reason more than CIDs. But if you have that type of development that would lend itself to that, definitely an option.
Because keep in mind, this is all new territory for us as well. And so the other thing that I'm trying to gauge and staff is trying to gauge, and I'm sure the board is too, is at what level, we're building, not only are we trying to build a policy, but we're trying to build a relationship, right, with yourself or another firm that's going to come in and help us with this.
Yeah.
We're trying to gauge also at what point or what level of involvement, like at what point do you get involved in?
Well, I think this is a good time.
Yeah.
I think that, but we can't do. Your engineer has to be involved. Sure. For that type of project, and then I think there is certainly a financial element to it. So your financial advisor or investment banking firm can can help with that as well. And part of that is, I mean, that can be anything from analysis on debt capacity of any of those types of financing mechanisms to, helping you with your tax rates and all of that stuff. But there are some that have a lot of experience with economic development type financings. All of them have a good experience with basic, infrastructure type financings. But I think that's something not to overlook. I mean, whether there's so much involved in the policy development, yeah, it's worth having them look at it, I think for sure. But I think more in the implementation, they really need to be involved. So.
And so then last question on that would be, so I know, for instance, like our financial advisor, they make their money when we borrow money, right? The
Right.
bigger the project, they make their money.
Sure.
So in an instance like this, where do you make what do we pay you for in that process? Do we pay flat rates? Do we pay you a portion of, and I'm saying you, but you or any other
Yeah.
firm, how do you make money off of that? And what fees do we look at?
Sure. So if you look at just the policy itself, we can figure that out. I mean, I think what we propose to you is just an hourly rate.
Okay.
And different folks have different hourly rates.
Sure.
We can cap it. We can figure all that out.
Sure.
I think, for us, I mean, just purely the economics of it, or we won't make a lot of money doing the policy. What we really want to do is help you for the next 5 years on these types of projects.
Right.
The beauty of that is the first thing you do out of the gate is you get the developer to sign what we call a funding agreement, where they put up money to pay the city's expenses for sort of the evaluation and consideration of the project. Again, a very typical thing. It's not just us. It can be your financial advisor, your planning firm, your engineer. It's just sort of depends on what the project is.
Sure.
So, the city will incur some cost up front for the policy itself, but the reality is you shouldn't be incurring costs, on development projects down the road. Now on a financing, a lease, a bond, those fees are paid for out of the proceeds of the issue. Those are city paid, but that's sort of a different,
Right.
Different animal. So.
Okay.
On that situation Sam was talking about, like a subdivision coming
Mhm,
in, and like for $500,000, and say that's 250 houses roughly.
right.
Do you see a lot of people doing like, I'm guessing they're doing like special assessment, like say $20 per house, that generates about $5,000 per month. That'd be, it'd be less than that on a 20-year payback with interest for the city.
Right.
And then do they give the city like so many lots or so for an asset to hold in case they can't fulfill their obligation?
So the way those neighborhood improvement districts work is exactly as you say. We put a special assessment on, it's paid annually with your property tax bill. And so if you don't pay your taxes, the county can come in and foreclose and sell for back taxes. Well, if the property isn't worth anything, that doesn't get you back. So it's not necessarily that you have like a mortgage on it in that traditional sense. You do have that right to the property if things aren't paid. That's a little frankly illusory, I think, because it takes a long time to foreclose. You don't know what you're going to get out of it. It's probably distressed if that happens. So the property isn't worth what it was. And that's part of that. That's why NIDs are so sort of frightening,
Is that what fell apart in Rogersville
Jamestown.
on Jamestown?
Yeah, there were
Okay.
two, and it's a little different, I think, what
Okay.
happened. But yeah, I mean, the gist of it was,
It fell apart. The county was left with it. They put the full assessment on the property taxes and
and there's Jamestown and Wilson's Creek, and they've treated them differently for whatever reason. On one they
Mhm.
foreclose, on one they haven't. You can clear the assessments off when you foreclose. Again, we'll get to this example I want to talk about, but and if I'm running over, let me know. I'll shut up anytime you want. But so you can clear the assessments off and then sell the land and take what you recoup to repay the bond or whatever.
okay.
Or you can foreclose, leave the assessments on and just, again, try to sell it, maybe at a discounted amount to somebody who will actually pay the assessments. Again, that takes time. And so you're covering the float there. So,
And just throwing it, as far as when to get like Rick involved, how I see it typically working, because I worked with Rick, like I said, Battlefield Stratford, when I was the city attorney for Branson, we did all the Branson Landing and all that stuff. You have this kind of handout, their pamphlet that Rick or that will put together that you would use as a city to say, here's kind of the things we're comfortable doing. When that person comes in and says, I'm ready to move forward and I'm going to need help on X, Y, and Z, that's when we call Rick and say, Sam Roast wants to build blah, 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 wants some incentives. We've given him the packet. He's interested in this, this, and this. Because if the developers are used to it, they're kind of used to that window. They'll say, I want to do chapter 100 bonds. I want to do this. Rick gets involved. They do a funding agreement, and then it's kind of off to the races. And that's when all of a sudden you get, Branson Landing, the documents would fill this room to the ceiling kind of thing.
right.
Right.
When all of a sudden it's all.
But in
everything's
those,
on paper.
Rick is representing us.
Right.
But being paid for by the developer.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. I appreciate the distinction. I think that, just purely on the policy stuff, I think just bring everybody to the table as early as you can. That's probably what I was trying to say, just beat around the
Right.
bush. But I mean, you guys are way ahead of where most people are in terms of your thinking on this, because nobody ever cares. And when I worked for Branson back in the day, if some of you may recall, they had a problem with their building inspection. And if you look back in the Springfield paper, actually the Kansas City paper far enough, you'll see me digging in the closet for inspection slips. Okay, that's not what you want to have happen. So that's sort of the extreme example, but in any event, there you go.
Okay.
So just to talk about some of the overall sort of policy considerations, again, as we sort of think about how to put the policy together, what's in it, what are we going to offer, what do we want? What is your appetite for debt, and what kinds? Are we willing to, pay property taxes to pay off debt for streets, road, or, water, sewer? What philosophically, what do we think about incentives? Is that just corporate welfare? Is that something that we shouldn't be doing, or, can we do it for public infrastructure, to help people build roads for part of their project? Or is it just any, worthwhile project where, all the chips are in? Do we want to grow? How do we want to grow? Do we want more residences? Do we want commercial? I mean, do we want the blend from a planning perspective? Are we sort of new urban, or are we, how does all that work? And really, as sort of an aside, I mean, once you decide those things, you can find people who develop those projects. I mean, other communities will give you the name. You can recruit those people, so why not? Why not? But anyway, do we want apartments, or do we want apartments with brick on the front? Or do we not want apartments at all? What do our taxing district partners think? Principally the school district, but others. And then who bears the burden? This is the old Branson thing, visitors or residents. I mean, it comes home really to roost there, but it's really everywhere. Anywhere that's like close to a highway, this is a legitimate sort of thought. Can we put a CID on the truck stop, at the exit, so the visitors pay, for those roads?
So we have a subcommittee that's doing land use planning on that northern corridor. And that's a lot of what we've been talking about is, your visitor section is this little area where our ADTs are high enough. But as you go back, where a lot of us thought, oh, that whole road's commercial. Well, it's probably not, is what we're learning. And so learning where the houses fit in and all of that. But there is definitely a visitor concept.
Yeah.
Not only because of I-44, but also because Route 66.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
And that northern corridor will serve both visitors.
Well, I think Stratford would say the same thing.
Absolutely.
I never thought about 66 going through there, but they have a little building, and it's
Mhm.
cool. Commercial versus residential. I mean, traditionally you want the commercial to pay generally because your residents vote. But, there's a balance to find there. Existing development or new development, generally the new development's going to pay for the new stuff, but the existing development might benefit, from new treatment capacity, or I think we talked about I&I type, improvements. And so there's a sharing, that'll need to occur there in terms of the cost. So on to the examples, the fun part, I think. So Branson Landing, again, 10,000 foot. This was principally a TIF and TDD deal from an incentive perspective, but the whole sort of concept of it was the city wants a convention center and the retail is going to pay for it. And that's what the TIF and TDD did. Little oversimplification, but yeah, that's the gist. So Vandevort Hotel, which is a cool downtown Springfield building, I think, that had actually been an old 353 project, and there's some law about re-blighting and getting more time. And so we determined that we could do a Chapter 100 to get abatement for them. The Mercy Orthopedic Hospital south of town there, pretty straightforward. TDD, needed some roads, kind of minimal retail there. And I neglected to change the name. This is now Cable Dahmer Arena, but this is one of the most interesting community improvement districts in Missouri, probably the biggest one. If you have any familiarity with the Independence, Missouri area, Bass Pro is not in the CID, but everything else around there is. And so what that allowed, then they levy a sales tax, and that pays the debt service on bonds that were used to build that arena. And it's cool because it's got sort of a minor league hockey team, minor league soccer, it's got a community ice rink. The great thing about it was they used existing development, so they knew the projections. Okay, if we do 1%, we're going to get this. We can pay debt service on this. And they just went out and got the signatures. I mean, to their credit, they just busted their hump and did it, and they got it. Now it's about 10 years old, so they got to figure out how to maintain it. But the CID actually does help them do that. I just threw this one in because I was east of Springfield. It's Busch Stadium. They did 353 pavement. I grew up in Joplin, which is Royal Country. So this Parkville is where I live now, which is on the north side of Kansas City, the Kansas City metro area. So there's a development, if you're familiar with the 435 Ring Road, on the west side of Parkville, called Creekside. And Creekside has all these things, but they just copied off their website. A lot of development of all types. It's really, the kickstart was youth baseball. And they built a cool complex, and they have the tournaments and all that, which is spurring the hotel growth. But the residential growth is a little bit different thing, and the industrial stuff is a little bit different thing. The good thing from the city side is that most of this property was two failed NIDs, and the city was paying debt service on these and had foreclosed and taken the property and owned it for a couple years, I would guess. So it didn't produce any revenue for them. So they've sold some of the property back to the developer at sort of a reduced cost, on the idea that he would build stuff that would pay assessments and that they would make their money back. So far, so good, knock on wood. Apartments are up, some of the commercials up. That's sort of just a map of the ball field, where it should be a lot bigger, but it's an impressive deal. And it's just, there was nothing out there, 3 years ago. Some pretty good stuff. I was talking to an investment banker on a transaction I was working on, and he was from Minneapolis, I believe, and his son was going to come down and play in a tournament.
But my kids are now older, but they host basically national tournaments.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big time complex where teams come from all over the country and play there.
Right. Well, they had just finished the new Burger King, so I told them not to miss Burger King. They got us a few other things now. But yeah, I mean, it's a first-class deal. I mean, it is truly very impressive. So Gladstone is another community north of the river in Kansas City, and just sort of one of my favorite longtime clients. This town is, unlike you all, is landlocked, and they can't annex, so they're kind of stuck with what they got. And it's a community that's sort of defined by two major road, thoroughfares. So there was never really that traditional downtown. They just never had it. They had a lot of commercial development on those thoroughfares, but never that sort of center city feeling of community or, place where it's fun for people to go. So they decided they were just going to create one. And it's taken a long time, but they did it sort of two ways. They did it with their money. First of all, they had a big park there, and they put a community center there. They partnered with the school district. The school district essentially pays to use the pool. So they've got a first-class aquatic center as part of it. So a good example of intergovernmental cooperation. And everybody gets something better than they could have done by themselves. City Hall's there, but they're building their new police station there. Parking, they built a little amphitheater there. So they've got that sort of, community feel. But then they went after land in that area, and they bought it, and then they recruited developers. And they were looking to build high amenity apartments to bring sort of, younger professional types into the area who could spend some money. And restaurant, whatever. So they did get that. They've got the apartments, they got the restaurant. They actually got a hotel, which I never thought they'd get, but they did it. They did an office building project, which they call the Innovation Center. And it's like I think it's called a CAPS program, where the local school district is the biggest tenant. But they also lease space to Northwest Missouri State and some businesses. And so there's a nice synergy for those kids to get opportunities that they, wouldn't always do. Then they bought an old building and sold it to a guy, and he turned it into these short-term office rentals, but they're like 30-day office. I mean, that's sort of the program, kind of a cool deal. So they went out and did it. And part of what they decided was, we're going to use our money to get this property so we control it. And then our incentive is we want our incentives to encourage not just development, but higher quality development. So anybody could come in here and build an apartment, with vinyl siding. That's not what we're looking for. And so that's what they got. And it's, of course, that's the PR photo, but it's a pretty cool spot. And they've got a great restaurant on the bottom floor that, pulls people from all over the north part of the metro area. And that's their Northland, the CAPS facility. Again, just first class all the way. And these are just anchors for other things that can occur in this area. So anyway, pretty exciting stuff. Questions, more questions.
I have one, probably multiple, but so we've looked at some examples. We've looked at some surrounding towns, and we've got one or two that I've actually found since I talked to you on the phone, of examples of their policies.
Yeah.
Why or why not? Why would we not just take something like that and model that for our policy? Why would we pay you to come in beside us and make a policy for us? What are we going to get out of that versus what we could put together in piecemeal from other surrounding communities, right? Because it's the area. Everybody's pretty much going to have kind of the same thing going on here. Maybe not what they're doing in Kansas City or St. Louis, but why would we do one or the other?
Well, I think it's really a question of, I agree. You could get 85% of the way there by just taking, I think Oak Grove has a nice policy. I think I sent it. Did I send that one to you? I'll send it to you.
Yeah,
Because it's concise, it's clear, it lays out the goals of the community by saying, okay, this is most favored. You know, it's great. I think the question really is, I mean, do you want to go through this process of sort of discovering what you want to be? And so I think, so I'm stepping out of the legal role and sort of becoming sort of a, maybe almost a facilitator type. And I don't know if you do or not. But I think that's the value of it. And you don't have to do that. You can probably get by taking their policy and putting your name on it. I mean,
Rick wants to do the deal.
yeah, I want to do the deal.
He wants to.
Nobody wants to write a policy.
The
So, and
Let's be
policy
real.
is-
And so I know that and I understand. That's where I kind of led off earlier with,
Yeah.
we're trying to build that relationship and select who we're gonna move
So if
forward
you
with.
take,
So-
I'll tell you what, you take that policy from Oak Grove and write it up how you want it. And I'll look at it for free and give you some comments if you hire me to do the deals. But what I'm saying is we can figure something out. The idea is not for us to get into the city's treasury. You know, I mean, that's just, that we don't want to do that because that makes us very unpopular. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. I worked for a city where Carl Yates's bills always fell behind the file cabinet, which was really mean, but I get it. You know, you got a budget. It's, you know, for professional services. I mean, if I blow it the first month of the fiscal year, you're not going to call me. That's not what we want.
And
So,
and I think it's very important for everybody in this room, staff included, to understand, to know and to understand. So my next question to follow up that would be, I'm assuming that there's some type of an agreement that you sign with somebody after they select you all.
yeah, we do an engagement letter.
Can you provide us a copy of a sample of what that looks like, of what that?
And it's you know, it's kind of just like a contract for services. We call them engagement letters just because ethically we're told we should really get them, even though lots of times we don't. But
Sure.
it sets out the rates and what we're going to do and that we represent you and, you know, those sorts of things. So it makes it all very, very clear.
There's been a couple times that you've mentioned, you know, you kind of reach out to the financial advisor, which I infer to mean is not your firm.
No, we're strictly a law firm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is good to know. It's also, board, as an auditor, it's very good to keep those two things separate. We need our financial advisor to be our financial advisor, and we need our bond counsel or whatever counsel that we're wanting to be two separate things. Those are not two services anybody would recommend combining.
Yeah, I mean, there's some licensure issues for the municipal advisors. Sometimes they like to be called, but I think that, and some of them, you know, different folks within those firms are better at certain things. Some of them have done the development deals and they just intuitively have that. Some of them are better at the infrastructure stuff.
Okay.
The big firms have it all, you know, so.
So what's the Stratford story?
Oh, I'm sorry, sure. Yeah. Well, the Stratford story is Paul called and said,
I guess what you usually
we
do.
might have a
is deals
big
go out
deal.
there, I represent this city and they got this deal they want to do and you're the man.
Yeah,
And then Rick comes in
the
and
rest
the
is
deal gets
history.
done.
Yeah, so this was actually one of the few, and Steve Bodenhammer had to convince me, I think. It's an industrial, you know, park project that, as near as I can tell, is pretty wildly successful based on the activity that I hear about. The rail was a big part of the initial development, but he proposed to do it as a tip. And I, you know, just experience for me was like, you know, retail tip, you know, industrial chapel. But it was valued as ag land. So once it developed, it would have such an increment that you could divert it and it would be significant enough to help fund the development that was going to occur, which was primarily, you know, internal infrastructure types of costs and things like that. what has sort of followed from that I thought might, but it really has, is that they're doing spec buildings typically, although not all. And so we're using chapter 100 on those, but we're using chapter 100 only to get the sales tax exemption on the construction materials, because if we gave them tax abatement, they wouldn't get any TIF revenue on the building. So the city's just kind of set on that. Hey, come on, because the materials aren't bought in Stratford. And they're probably not even bought in Greene County. Or I mean, I'm sure some are, but so you're not really impacting the local taxing districts when you do that. And you're offering just, a few $100,000 of savings to any given project that already has subsidized land costs, because of the tip. So I think it's gone really well. It was sort of fun to deal with the original developer. He's quite a character, but he's moved on, and it's now a local fellow that's ramrodding it. And I've sort of lost track of how many build. I think we got a couple more on the horizon. We finished a couple for that.
Yeah, I've seen some site prep
Yeah.
every
So,
day. Is that your thing?
It's a real success story, but I think that Stratford, I mean, you guys drive by Stratford all the time. I mean, it's not a place with a lot of staff. I hadn't seen a lot of activity, I would suspect, historically. Luckily, they had a good guy as city manager, who lifelong Stratford guy, been on the school board, knew everybody, and he knew when he needed a little extra help. So anyway, but it's been fun, and I mean, the story is not over. I think the city manager there is going to go crazy from all the activity that has generated
For
as
sure.
a spinoff. So
Any questions from the board? Rick, we thank you very much for coming out tonight.
my pleasure. Thank
Hope you do not get blown away on your way home.
I hope so too. And pretty you for the place on the agenda. That is also pretty good.
Absolutely. That way you get home tonight instead of tomorrow.
That's right. Exactly. Like this will be it.
All right. Board, if it's all right with you, I want to backtrack real quick. In my wanting to get through the agenda, I skipped this whole post-it note I had over here. So I'm going to skip back to departmental reports. Mark, Parks and Tree, we didn't have any meetings in December, but is there anything you'd like to update the board on?
We have done the 12 months of programming, and we are winding down now. We still got one ongoing program. It's a dance class. It's our second year. It will showcase that will be at Sunrise Church, I believe, this Saturday. So that will end our programming for 2021, and we'll focus on the program starting January 2022, which is youth basketball. Hidden Waters had an opportunity to get several free tulip bulbs. They got 8,500 tulip bulbs, and they have landscaped and put those along the walking path there on Parks property. That went through the park board, and the park board approved that. And so in the spring, when the tulips come out, we should have 8,000 plus tulips. There should be a sight to be seen. You'll be able to see it from the walking path. You'll be able to see it from CC or Hubble there, and it should be neat. So
Awesome.
but that's what's going on right now.
Okay. Planning and zoning, Robbie, anything that's not in the packet? You moved on me, sorry.
So we did have a final plat for J&W Additions. It's on the agenda tonight. They're basically where the old record type music is at. They're splitting that into a house, and they built a small house on the back. You'll notice that the lot is smaller because it's 6,000 square feet, which then the city code allows you to do that on 3
Okay.
units.
All right. Land use subcommittee, anything you want to update on, Steve?
We did have a meeting and we went over information that Scott provided for us. One of the things that we found out based on the amount of traffic that goes through there and the number of rooftops that would be needed the amount of commercial area support by rooftops was greatly reduced. So then we looked at what would we, how much commercial would be needed with, as we call it, visitors. And so we looked at both of those, and then we had everyone do an exercise. And so they drew what they felt would be appropriate for commercial, single family, and multifamily housing along that corridor.
I am somewhat interested to ask, so in the first coloring exercise we had, myself and somebody else that was not sitting next to me drew almost the exact same map on this great big piece of paper. So we both drawn a new map. Are we anywhere near still the same? Oh, I really want to know that. You'll have to give me text. Okay. Finance advisory, Monica, anything new from them that's not already in our packet? Just what's in the packet. Okay, so we'll get to that with the budget. Cemetery did not meet, correct? And Grow Marshfield, Dwayne?
Yeah, not a whole lot either. It's a slower time of year anyway, but we've got like 3 or 4 leads from Missouri Partnership. One of them, we actually put together a proposal, submitted on that one. Good learning lesson for us on this that we're seeing, but I think it's a good fit, but we just never know where that's going. On chamber side, we've got 3 different ribbon cuttings coming up. One tomorrow. The whole kitchen is going to have their ribbon cutting for their new one, 6:30 tomorrow. On Saturday, there's a new salon down on the square that's having a ribbon cutting, and then over on Monday at noon, Kim Cliff, who's with Edward Jones, is splitting into her own office. And so she's going to be moving into an office over behind Burger King, that little strip center there. So on Monday at noon, we'll be seeing that. The other is, of course, is the Christmas parade that was last week. Everything went well. I think most of the feedback we got it. They enjoyed it and everything. The weather came up, I guess, and kind of shortened it up a little bit, unfortunately. So a few lessons learned, but I don't know.
Absolutely. And just in case you get asked, so Michael Taylor as our EMS had been, or as our emergency management, had been in contact with the chamber since about noon. We involved the National Weather Service around 2 o'clock. As with any conversation you have with a National Weather Service, it kind of goes like this. Well, yeah, there could be some bad weather coming your way sometime. That's how you put it in a nutshell. So of course, they made the decision to go on with the parade, and no one would have guessed that there'd be a funnel drop just outside of town as we get about halfway through. Thank you very much, Doug. I know your guys responded very quickly. That we quickly found out that the chamber did not have radio communication. They only had cell phones. And so it was very hard for them to communicate this emergency through their chains. So the information then went to dispatch. Doug's guys that were busy blocking off all the roads got into the parade route and was able to notify everybody on the square. So great job. Once again, everybody was safe. Obviously the funnel cloud didn't drop, so great news there. Several of us got pelted.
Few lessons learned. I mean, Kelly,
Several of us got a few hailstones, no big deal.
Kelly's doing a great job, and like I said, a big project, 2.5 months into the job, I think things went off. And even when you talk to her, she's gonna tell you, I learned a lot, and she knows she's gonna coordinate better here, as well as with the county folks at the Fort Square. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, it was the best attended Christmas parade I have ever seen since I've been around. That was a lot of people. We ran out of hot cocoa really, really early.
The tree lighting, are they gonna redo that as far as an event or?
Not this year, no, they won't do another one, no, but but yeah, because of the weather, it was supposed to be at like at 8 o'clock.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
And they had to, but
Okay. Well, thank you for letting me back up for that, just so that we know what's going on. It will be a while before we meet again, so I wanted to make sure that was approved. Sam, the approval of purchase of a blower motor.
So at the last meeting, you guys had approved funds for the blower itself. And so since that time, they sit on top of a motor. And so one of them, our big one, we've had some issues. It is back up and going now. However, the idea was to have one that was ready to go on the shelf, ready to go in. And so you don't have anything in your packet for tonight, but I am asking for the approval of the purchase for a motor for both of those blowers. We had originally budgeted $40,000 as a growth area for this year to come back to the board if necessary. You guys had approved $22,954. We had, like I said, we budgeted 40. What I'm asking for approval tonight would be $9,976.69, which would bring that up to almost $33,000 spent of that 40,000. We did get multiple bids on it. The low bid is low by about $275, so they were very, very close. They do believe that, I mean, the lead time on them, they've got, one of them is 2 to 3 days, one of them is 3 to 4 days. So I'm very hopeful, and I anticipate these to be expenditures out of this year's budget. If not, then they will have to carry over into next year, but I do anticipate for them to be out of this year.
So we are looking for approval because this was a growth area item and the cost of it. We're looking for approval to purchase blower motors up to $10,000.
I'll make that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Approval for purchase and installation of fencing for lift station number 1. Who's got this
I'm
one?
gonna turn that over to Steve.
Okay,
This is for fencing for the lift station that is right at Jefferson. And
they're at the sign and the off ramp.
What-
Okay, got it.
so we looked at a couple of different options, and you've got those in your package. The first option is a 6-foot tall black chain link fence around. The idea there is to be able to see through it, so we can see if anybody's in there. The other obstacle that we had was because of our large sign being so close, we did not want to take away from that. So we didn't want anything solid that would block for that. The other thing we did look at was the option of going to a steel fence, more decorative, a lot more expensive. And it wasn't something that we really liked. So based on Richard and I looking at it, we felt that the 6-foot tall chain link fence with the gates that will allow them to open it up if they're putting in there, do any repairs and modifications they need to. And we did get a second bid, not only from Carmen and White, but we also got one from BOA, and that's in the packet as well. The one from Carmen and White was, it is within the budget that was set up for the fence, it's below that. So that's why I'm presenting that.
Couple questions. Did we move this over into the new budget? I'm guessing this work won't be done before the end of the year.
I think the materials we purchased, but I don't think the work will be completed until immediately right after the first of the year.
Okay,
Right, and we've already got a confirmation from them that the price will not change because we have, as you can see, it's October 18th.
Mhm.
First, price is still the same, they will hold that, and they will have it completed in the first 2 weeks of January.
okay.
Which with the approved purchase of it could still qualify for the 2021 budget.
Any questions on this project? If not, I'm looking for a motion to approve Carnahan White.
Option 1. On option 1, right?
On option 1.
Right. I'll make that motion.
All in favor? We're all in a hurry tonight. It's all right. It's all right. Okay, 2022 budget. Monica, would you like to walk through what we have here?
Absolutely.
We have a list of the budget changes from what was presented on December 2nd. The big one for the general fund, a couple of ones here. I've added the sale of the sale proceeds from the building on the square as a sale of asset in the 2021 estimated actual. And then I've moved that up into the cash line earmarked for city hall improvements or renovations. So it won't, it'll be set aside. And then because of the rent revenues will no longer continue with that sale from that building, I've removed the revenue from the revenue line there and then decreased the money that has been set aside for the as rent revenues. Every month we receive rent revenues and then it is set aside. And so that has been updated as well. Then I have, I've moved the allocation from the general fund for the Grow Marshfield to the full amount to the cash expenditure in the growth area. And that's the 16,000. And then I've updated the police chief's base wage. Updated property and liability insurance to remove the 101 West Jefferson. And that, yeah, I've removed it, but there may be, insurance is based on your coverage, I guess. So it may not be the exact amount that I'm removing. It may be a little different from that. And then there's been an employee that has, through open enrollment, has added family health insurance. And so there has been some changes based on how the employee has been allocated. So that should cover the changes in the general fund. Any questions on that?
The rent revenue money account,
Yes, ma'am.
where does that move to?
The rent revenue for the estimated actual of 2021 is 177,801. And then with the revenue coming in for the tower and the fairgrounds, that we will receive some revenue for that. And that also is being separated out. So we would have 196,491 in there. And then based on that same allocation that we used for City Hall in 2021, the renovating and updating City Hall on the square, a portion of that rent revenue was being used as well as some unallocated cash. So a combined rent revenue and unallocated cash.
That goes into the growth areas.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's why you see the negative 177,000. It's really being used towards that growth area for the City Hall down below on the next page.
Okay. Follow. I
Question?
follow a little better. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? And then on the cemetery fund, a portion of the Grow Marshfield has been allocated to the growth area to cover the health insurance change. And then most of the other ones, and we can go through each one, but most of the other ones have to do with any contract balances that have not been paid, that have been approved in this year or previous years that we're still carrying over. I tried to look at that, all of those contract balances and move those balances to 2022 budgets. Since really not going to be able to pay them.
The only ones I want to call out, because I'm going to bring it up again here in just a few minutes, is if you look down at the water fund, and this is also in the, I saw it in the wastewater treatment plant fund, the 35,000 for the utility truck. So we had already approved that as a 2021 growth area expenditure, but we weren't able to find a truck. So we've moved that over into 2022 here in a minute, I'll ask you to retake action on that as well. And then the mini excavator, again, that's something we had already taken action on, but it just hasn't materialized yet. It's not going to be a 2021 expense, so we've got to move it to the next budget as well.
They said today to expect it the first week of January. They also said to expect it the first week of October.
That one you won't have to take additional action on because
Yeah.
we just had to carry it over because it's definitely not going to be a current expense.
Yeah, it's ordered. It's
It's just not here.
We are ready for it.
Are there any questions on those changes? Do you have any questions on the budget or the letter that was included from the Finance Advisory Committee? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to take several different actions tonight, but I want to do them one at a time and then explain the next piece and go from there. So the first thing I would like to ask you to do is to approve the 2022 budget and growth areas as presented, with the understanding that all items in a growth area require additional board approval before they can be spent. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I will go ahead and read that bill because I forgot we have to do that. So bill number 2021-43, an ordinance adopting an annual budget for the fiscal year beginning on January 1, 2022, and appropriating funds pursuant thereto.
Make a motion to approve.
Roll call.
Aye.
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 Second reading, bill number 2021-43, an ordinance adopting an annual budget for the fiscal year beginning on January 1, 2022, and appropriating funds pursuant thereto.
Second.
Roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Now, within that budget, we need to make a few additional actions. The first thing that I want to draw your attention to is the employee wages, taxes, retirement, blah, 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 the COLA sheet. It's right behind the letter from the Finance Advisory Committee. And what we have here is various different scenarios as we've talked about, giving one amount as a COLA increase, which will go to all employees, and the remaining amount, which is already budgeted, being used, we'll call it discretionary, but having management empowered to make salary decisions for their employees. That discretionary money will not apply to Sam, Doug, Karen, and Mark, because those are the four that the board has separately reviewed. Okay, so we have four different scenarios here for you. We have 3.7, which if we do 3.7, every employee, including the four we talked about, gets a 3.7% increase in their pay. And there is no discretionary at all. From there, we have three additional options. We have a 3, a 2.5, and a 2. If you look at the very bottom of the page, this is the amount of money that would be approximately left over for discretionary. There are 35 employees that are not in, or that are in the pool of possible discretionary increases. Management increases, merit increases, performance increases. I don't know what you want to call them. We'll work on terminology later, but that's kind of the decision I am now looking for, and guidance I'm looking for from the board as far as which one of those numbers is our COLA, and the remainder will be what management uses for discretionary.
I'm still kind of the opinion that with the cost of living being so much higher that we go with 3.7. But I know that's not the popular opinion, so I'm okay with whatever. I mean, I think discretionary is fine too, but we're in a special year, I think, this year. So I'd be in favor of 3.7 across the board.
I don't have my sheet out. I'll knock that down as John. JC?
Well, I'd like to do the 3.7 also, but I think we need to have a little leeway. Which one, I don't know for sure.
Okay, Stacy? Robbie?
So if I'm not mistaken, we did not do a COLA last year.
Correct.
So, that being said, I think that John's right, it's been, there's been tremendous inflation. So I'm kind of of the mindset, I like the two with giving supervisors a little bit of room to make up the difference. So I like that standard two with the 1.7 for supervisors to make changes. Whether that's, they decide that that's across the board or what, just gives them a little bit of
Of flexibility. Okay, so I have, as far as setting COLA percentages, I have a 3.7, a 2.5, and a 2. So at this point, I do not have any consensus, so I would encourage discussion.
with the two and then 1.7 for supervisor.
Exactly what you said.
I'm fine.
Okay, so that will mean that every employee gets 2%. And then
Still pretty good rate.
after they get through the performance appraisal process, management will have the ability to figure out what happens with the remaining 39,000 we have in our budget. Or we can go to 2.5.
It's
right?
not my ideal, but yeah.
I mean, 3 cuts it close if you want to have any discretionary, especially when you got 35 people to pick through. 2.5 gives some ability, but there's about $10,000 between each. If somebody has a specific input, I'm looking for a motion and a second.
Well, I heard it 2.5. Can I get a 3? Okay, I guess not.
You can still have discussion.
I don't know, it's not a terrible idea. I mean, I would like to give these supervisors some sort of ability to incentivize their employees, so maybe that 2.5 to 3, still gives them a little bit, not a ton, that way, helps, at least we keep our benefits closer.
And it's our first year of doing this. I mean,
Since it is our first year, can we get, not by name, but maybe by department employee 1 through whatever,
yes.
kind of a breakdown to see the work?
Yeah.
Some kind of feedback.
Yeah, so we will receive a summary, not by name, but a generalized summary of how the evaluation process went and what management's determination was of using that money. Again, just so that we can monitor the process and make sure it's working the way we thought it would. Because if it's not, we'll go back to COLAs.
So maybe because we didn't do one last year, maybe John's right, maybe the balance is 3% with a 0.7, it's not quite 1%, but you still give them something, and that way at least all the employees will get a pretty fair increase to that more.
I could go with that.
everybody's appetite.
Well, and you can also look at, give them 2.5 and then that gives them more money. Well, you're not getting much money at 3. You're just getting $16,000.
And that's less than fact that you think, they say they split it at even, that's $470 per employee, that's not.
I'll be honest, if
If
they
it's
split it out even, I'd be a little bit disappointed because we then should have just given it as a
I
COLA.
would
Right,
too.
exactly.
I was just trying to figure out.
Yeah,
I'm interested in like Stacy, how they'll actually break it
Yeah.
down.
yeah, yeah.
So you like to think that everybody's pulling 100%. So you like to think that it would most likely do it all jobs.
Right.
So can we go with?
So am I
2.5?
now hearing, am I hearing 2.5?
I can do 2.5.
I think everybody can
I'll
settle
do
that.
2.5.
All right, I'm looking for,
And that way that gives it a little bit more.
And give them the ability to appropriate it at 1.3.
okay, looking for a second. There we go. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that was item number 2 on my list over here. For
And
the-
And we will be having feedback. don't
We
need
will
that as
get
part of the
feedback
motion.
before this, yeah. So the idea was that these raises would hopefully be ready to go into effect July 1, mid-year, right? So, or June 1, depending on when they can get through all this process. There are some areas that we have evaluation processes and there's areas that we don't, and we're gonna have to figure that one out, right? So this lets them get that process, get through it, hopefully this spring before business gets crazy, and then figure out how the split of the money, because we also have a lot of people that are paid out of a lot of funds. And so dividing this up into pools is tricky. That's the reason we just gave you one big amount of money down at the bottom, because I can't tell you exactly how that's going to split out.
Right.
I just can't. Okay, so now that we have that settled, we have, if you will go to the page behind the budget changes, it is the 2022 growth areas. So I told you I was gonna bring up that $35,000 on the truck. Because it had to be moved into this budget, because there's been absolutely no movement on it going forward. I am asking that you reappropriate that amount for them to continue looking for the truck that we already agreed to look for.
Make that motion.
All in favor?
All right.
Thank you. The second thing I'm going to ask is if you would go ahead and approve us to move forward on the PD vehicles. My understanding is that the lead time on those still puts us in what, July?
Yeah, July.
And that's if we order them now. The longer we wait with other cities passing their budgets, the farther behind we're going to be on that list. So those are already appropriated out of funds or financing that we have approved, and it is not the enterprise funds that we are waiting till they're solvent. So I'm asking for approval to move forward on those vehicles. All in favor? Thank you.
Just so it's no surprise, we'll be bringing, when it gets closer to time, we will be bringing you lease purchase agreements for those with a bank. So there's some paperwork that'll have to be done when it gets closer time for us to actually finance it. So just so you know that one of those is paid for out of cash.
We go ahead and get one, right?
We'll go ahead and get them on order, right?
All right. Now, if you will turn in your packet, there is a resolution for committing the proceeds of the sale of 101 Jefferson. You know, it's getting real when I break out a textbook, so. I can't keep all my words straight, so I had to bring my brain along. There are 4 different ways that governments can, no, really 5, but there are 4 main ways that governments can set aside money for a very, very specific use. There is non-spendable, which is our liabilities. It's basically already spent, just not paid yet. So that's one area. There is restricted, but somebody above us has to say that it's restricted. So there are state laws on many of our funds that says we can't use that money for anything else, right? That's restricted. We don't have that authority. The next level is committed. We have the authority to commit funds for a designated purpose. And we can do that through ordinance or resolution. And we have a resolution here to do that. What I am asking the board to do is to commit the sale, the proceeds from the sale of the building on the square to the future city hall project, whatever that may be. What we've done in the budget is we've put that on a separate line so that you can clearly see in the general fund, there's a line that says City Hall. I didn't read it. It says something about City Hall. And it's got $625,000 on That is what that is doing. It's just taking that money and putting it in a separate pot and saying, this is what we plan to do this for. Now, if something happens and we have to use that money for something else, all we do is we come back in here and we change our mind. And that is the same for every board ahead of us. Yes, they can always redirect the money, but this is the most legal restriction we can place on this. Okay, so with that, I am asking for approval of resolution 2021-09, a resolution committing the proceeds from the sale of 101 Jefferson.
Natalie, I had a
Yes.
question. Some of the funds that were used to purchase the building came from water and sewer, right?
Mhm.
Should we not put that back into water and sewer?
Did you reach out to Marshall on how he wanted it presented?
No, I didn't. We had talked about it, but
I didn't know if there was any.
so the methodology behind the budget, the way that it stands now, and this is the way that I presented it to the finance committee as well, was that there's still money in the growth areas for the budget for city hall improvements. And so the mentality behind that, or the methodology behind that, is that you have $625,000 from the sale of that property, as well as funds already budgeted from other departments that we've seen what the cash impact is. So in reality, the way, and you guys just took action to appropriate all of those funds. So in reality, you have $1.1 million worth of funds for city hall improvements. But to answer your question, I haven't talked to Marshall about it.
Okay.
But that same allocation is what you see in.
So by this resolution, we're taking what we did before and just carrying it forward.
Right.
So, go.
And regardless of, even if they decide that this needs to be split out of the general fund and into it'll just show up as that same line on every fund it sits. That's all this will do.
Okay.
This just commits those funds regardless of where they sit. There's nothing in here tied to the general revenue fund.
I'd make a motion to approve.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we have a final plat of JW addition and a replat of the west half of lot 19 and lot 20, block 8 west of just addition. That was my practice run. Steve?
Okay, the final plat, this actual, you've got a drawing in front of you for the final plat. This is the mechanized building that we almost know it by. And what they've done, the current owner is the surveyor who did the work, and his mother-in-law is in bad health. Right now, she's living in a camper on this lot, and they want to provide a more permanent structure for her. So they have already told us this is what they're gonna call a temporary house, but it does meet all the requirements of our building codes. And so that's why they split off the backside, because they have to split it off to have a residence in B3. So it is zone B3. The residence portion then falls under what's considered our R3 requirements, which means minimum lot size is 6,000. So that's why you see that lot just a little over 6,000. But it also maintains the larger lot next to Jackson. The other thing that they did was they gave us 10-foot right of way, which is in with our comprehensive plan for Jackson to be 80 feet wide. So now they've given us from the center line to the property 40 feet. So anything else we would need would come across the street. So that's already taken care of. There was no right of way needed at Washington because it was already wide enough. So we didn't ask for anything there. Any other questions?
Anything you want to add, Robbie?
And that, given the additional 10 feet, does that still leave plenty of room for parking stuff? That's kind of weird.
It is very tight, and so we have looked at that and decided that we would allow them to park on there because it does encroach upon their existing parking lot. But we as staff, we don't see a need to use it right away. We've got plenty right now. Plus, we've got some on the other side that we can get if we need it. But at this point, we don't see it as a problem. And they've already dedicated, and the idea is that when they no longer are using that building, then the parking goes too.
Which I guess you can move it around back. You got plenty of room to move parking around back there.
It's just that the ramp for that facility happens to be in the front. But, you know, I'm not saying that there's not enough room to get a single car there to park. We have to get parking in the back, so. But, yeah, we realized that we were encroaching really tight, but they were okay with it.
Any questions on this item? All right, I'll read the bill. Bill number 2021-44, an ordinance approving the final plat J and W addition, a replat of the west half of lot 19 and lot 20, block 8, west addition to Marshfield, Webster County, Missouri. Roll call, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Second reading. Bill number 2021-44, an ordinance approving a final plat J and W addition, a replat of the west half of lot 19 and lot 20, block 8, west addition to Marshfield, Webster County, Missouri.
Make a motion to approve.
Roll call, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, on future agenda items, I tried to go through my brain of all the things that we have done this year, because there has been a lot of them, right? And tried to fish out what I thought the loose ends were. And to be honest with you, I did not have enough time to actually go back to my notes and figure that out. But what I have written down, so things that we are bringing forward into 2022, we are not necessarily going to see these things in January. It's just acknowledgement that we are carrying them forward. Our city hall and future city projects, we've done our prioritization. I know there's already action from staff on working on several of those different buildings and different projects. And next year, we're going to see, I think, a lot of information and be able to start making some decisions to move forward. Personnel manual, this is something I started and dropped like a hot rock. So we need to pick it back up and carry it forward. The best advance I can tell you I've made is I was able to get in contact with Jennifer, which wasn't that hard since I do work with her, but nonetheless, I got in contact with Jennifer. She's a personnel lawyer actually with the university. She's also worked with Paul quite a bit. And she's going to be conducting our first ever sexual harassment training for our supervisors and our employees. I'm sure our employees are just clamoring to get into that. But it's an important part of being an employer these days. There are a lot of compliance that I think we can shore up. So this is one small step in getting this taken care of. The personnel manual would be another small step into getting that taken care of. Capacity study. So we got the first version or portion of that, but there is more to come. And in fact, there is, we've been talking about the wastewater treatment plant and the work that's needed down there. And so here soon, you're probably going to see a work order for, Great River Engineering to come in and redo our facility plan, because unfortunately we do not have another option in moving forward. Our current facility plan obviously is not working. So in order to move in the right direction with DNR, we need to do another facility plan. That will kind of go hand in hand with what we were already working on with sewer capacity, because a lot of the big questions in capacity aren't just the size of the pipes and the lift station capacities, but it's what the plant's going to handle once it gets there as well. So tying those two projects together, Sam has pointed out, will add some great efficiencies in that and really make a better project. But we're not going to have that second half ready immediately. So, but we will have it next year. Rate analysis, we've been working on that. That'll come up next year. Fee and code review will be ongoing. We've all brought up burn permits and fence permits or all sorts of other ideas. I know that Steve's working his way through the great big book, one paragraph at a time. We will see those as they are ready. Some of those have to go through planning and zoning before they'll come to us. So it just takes longer for some of those changes to matriculate. And then also I do have a note on this that we want to see the grow contract mid-year. So that we'll put that on the calendar to start talking about it maybe around June. Gives us a much longer time to have discussion, ask questions, and allow for information than what you had this time. I know there's other things. Those are just the ones that I could think of. Is there anything else that we need to add to future agenda items? Okay, yes, it's not the COLA, it's the. We want salary increases. I'm just gonna put mid-year salary increases.
Do we want to relook at the leaf dump site too, somewhere in there?
A reevaluation of maybe after spring,
Yeah, I think so.
that after spring.
I'm not sure. I know JC knows the most about it. So who do you think is a good time?
I think we need to start talking a little earlier than we did last time. Yeah, and I think it worked out great. this year. I don't
Okay.
know.
Do you think May, June?
We need to talk about it. Start by then, I would say, get everything if we need, but we're not gonna have as much to get ready for like we did last. year.
Right.
So,
Okay,
I mean, we could
Look at the numbers.
look at it and just.
I can bring that back to you. I mean, we're waiting on the information to come back now from, because the last day is this Saturday. And so we're waiting on that information to come back so we can kind of put that in the report form, but we can bring that back whenever we kind of
Yeah.
get a
Right.
chance to
Because
see the
next year's
success.
probably more normal year. We might have to start up earlier.
But it was a success in my end. I mean,
They've
we
had
didn't have,
great weather out there. They've only
Yep.
had one day it's cold on it. So.
oh,
And I went out there today.
My question is, are we going to do grass?
yes, it was meant for leaf and grass
Yeah.
clippings,
so we'll have
correct?
to address it prior to mid-year. I mean, we'll have to bring this back in February or so somehow, so that we know how often we want it to open and how much you want to spend and how much you want to spend to do that. We'll
Okay.
have to figure out the staffing. for that.
Can we put it on February?
Yeah, I've got it down here.
I was talking to Sam yesterday about the trash service removal.
Thank you. Refuse. So we should come due on our 2-year letter
Into
February.
in February.
Into February.
Okay, so that will open up our opportunity to bid these services for our citizens. And going through a competitive process, seeing if we can get a better rate and definitely a better use of our roads for very, very, very large trucks. So we probably need to touch base on that in January.
Steve and I have already started the conversation, so we've
Fantastic.
already, I've got a lot of information from some other cities and what they've done, what's worked and what hasn't worked. So
Okay.
we've already kind of started working on it. So.
Okay. That sounds great. As far as I'm concerned, we could probably just let the staff roll with it and bring it back to us as soon as we have information to present.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is to be in that February, March area, but there's a lot that goes into it. And so February is just as soon as we can do anything with it. But there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, which once we kind of figure out what we want to do, then we're gonna have to get Paul involved too. So.
Yes. Okay. So it doesn't have to be a complete list. I just kind of wanted to bring some of these things back. We have been so focused on budget for so long that I kind of felt like some of the issues just eventually kind of fall off the top of my list anyway. So I wanted to bring them back up to the top. And again, I'm not saying that in January, we're going to tackle these issues. That's not what's going to happen. I just wanted to bring some light back to them. Okay. Then we will enter closed session. So pursuant to section 61021 subsection 3 of the revised statutes of the state of Missouri pertaining to hiring, firing, disciplining, or promoting particular employee, I'm looking for a motion to enter closed session. Roll call, please.